Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Canton.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And this week we're going to be talking about how much you should change a real life influence. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup. And Dave, you can go first.
Okay, another Drabble, written, published, and published. So that's going well. I've sorted some niggles I had with the structure of a short story I'm writing for a collection, because it's pulp, but it's pulp set in the modern day. So the big problem I was suffering from was that obviously one of the huge things in pulp is that the hero is dynamic, they act, they are the driver of the plot. But in the modern day, situations in which someone can be heroic and not take their problem to the authorities are much smaller than they were in 1930s America. So I kept running against the problem like, okay, my hero is dynamic. They are capable of smacking this thug in the chops, but why? Why wouldn't they? Why would they go off like a lone wolf without them also turning into someone who's a bit ambivalent and criminal? But I managed to sort that. Won't say what it is, obviously, because don't want to spoil the surprise. But that's sorted. Written the first half of another short story that's been rolling around in my head for a while. So again, managed to untangle how to get that one out. And had a bit of a play with the new Drabbles feature on Writer Tracker, which is a slightly different way of writing Drabbles, but I haven't done enough yet to know whether it's going to be better or worse than just sticking them into a word processor and ronking round. But it's got something there. In the it's got more options than a word processor already.
Mm.
I'll let Simon talk more about Writer Tracker as it's his program.
Yeah, for my week, I made that after we talked about Drabbles for an hour last week. I put Drabbles into a Drabble editor thing into Writer Tracker. And essentially what it does is you can put in lots of ideas into a big bucket, like a description of your ideas. Then you can go through your ideas. You can select one of them by double clicking on it, and then you have your idea on one side and your Drabble on the other, and you write your Drabble. And so I've written 6, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But I have a different process today where I tend to throw a lot of things at the wall and see which ones are any good, rather than putting a lot of thought into it beforehand and then only writing good ones, especially when it's only 100 words long. So I sent out my first official Drabble to my mailing list on Thursday, and I've said I'm going to send one every week. And I got 5 or 6 people saying, I really like this and it's good to hear from you. And I got 5 unsubscribes out of 840 people or whatever. So that's fine. 5 people that probably weren't going to pay attention to anything I wanted anyway. And as I say, 100 words is not, like, I've been doing Drabbles in like spare time I have. So my kid's watching Tintin on Netflix, so I just sit there with the laptop and write a Drabble. So it's perfect, because you're not committing to writing a chapter. You don't have to get into huge amounts of plot and try and remember lots of stuff. You're just writing 100 words. So I wrote those, and I also wrote a chapter of Killer President, which is the 4th Harris Aaron book. because Writer Tracker is getting to the stage where there's still bugs and there's still features I want to put in, but because I've got the majority of the underlying stuff in, I can actually start writing again. And it was November, I think, the last time I actually wrote something. So not completely, like I've written little bits and bobs here and there, but the last time I wrote a proper book, I worked on a book, was November. So that's nearly 6 months, 5 months, I guess. So yeah, so that's good, because obviously the whole point of Writer Tracker is to help me write. If I don't end up writing anything because I'm working on Writer Tracker, that doesn't really help. Yeah. Story threads as well, there's some bugs in it. Dave and I were just discussing one before the podcast, which I need to fix, but I'm slowly fixing those as well. And we're going to be working on ways to make that a more effective system so that it helps us. That's about it for writing. We can get on to our topic. Dave, you raised the topic. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, right. I was inspired actually by what I'm assuming was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question. Is someone potentially like clued in by all the talking about Drabbles we did last week, went through my backlist, and one of the Drabbles I wrote is about one of my cats, only written as if my cats were the heroes of a Norse saga. And so someone asked me if my cat was actually a Viking cat. And obviously that he's not. I say, well, that's obviously an obvious change, but you can still immediately recognize that it's him. So one of the things that everyone says about writers is you've got to be careful or they'll stick you in a book, or I've got this really great idea, you should put me in your book, whatever. So however we get our ideas, one of the places we get them from is people we see. And if you happen to overhear a snippet of conversation in a coffee shop, like the cadence, the rhythm, and write something that's quite similar, the chances of the person you overheard reading that particular line and thinking, oh, I said something similar, but they put it in the words, this character isn't like me at all, I'm insulted, and actually starting a campaign of some kind are very small. But if you put your postman in, your postman does something funny, and you stick in a comical postman figure, there's a point at which, well, if they don't like it, they might recognize themselves because they know you're an author, because you keep getting books through the mail. And
or even, yeah, they do a search for your name, or one of their friends says, hey, this postman in this is just like you.
Yeah. So it's obviously sort of at one end, there's the very careful, don't mention a shop, because if you mention a shop, it could cause you trouble if that shop doesn't like your book and doesn't like being associated with it. So even just mentioning a shop as local colour, even if the shop doesn't feature as a plot point, some people will avoid. Or at the other end, there's the just write it, it's not a problem. If someone feels insulted, that's their problem, not yours. But in the middle, there are two factors that are tugging on me. One of them is the fact that I don't want the hassle of someone taking objection to my books. Whether or not I'm right, whether or not it's acceptable for me to stick someone in the book and only change them slightly or not at all, if someone starts saying, I don't like your books, that's not something I want. So if there's an easy way to avoid it, that's something I do. And secondly, whether or not you're right, proving you're right against the charge of defamation is a huge hassle. And again, why not avoid it if you can?
I think there's two aspects. There's two aspects to it, though. I mean, it's not necessarily just a legal thing. Like, it could be your brother or your sister or your mother or your father or whatever, and they read your book and they go, well, this is obviously me, so I'm never speaking to you again.
Yeah.
There is the legal aspect.
That's what I mean. There's the social aspect and the legal aspect. And the hassle of having your brother-in-law decide that he's not speaking to you because there's a character in a book that's based on him who's odd in a way that he doesn't think he is, or is too accurate, and he doesn't want the whole world knowing he does that. Yeah, so there are two approaches. One of them is to check in advance, which potentially with your brother-in-law you can do. That if your brother-in-law puts his foot through the decking, falls forward, hits the rake falls over, switches on the lawnmower, the lawnmower shoots off and crashes through the door of the shed, you can ask, that was quite funny, do you mind if I stick that in a book? And obviously, for smaller things, you can still ask your brother-in-law. But for some people, for example, your postman, it's not necessarily so easy to ask. Not just from the difficulty of starting the conversation with, you're a little bit clumsy, do you mind if I put you in a book? And I'd like to point out my postman isn't clumsy. My postman is great. I just picked postman because my postman is one of the people I interact with more often than not. So it was a good example. But asking your postman that is a little bit trickier because you're not necessarily going to see them that often. And you're not going to be able to necessarily give them a copy of the scene and say, is this okay? So the second approach is to not make it recognizable, to make it less like them than you think it needs to be to not be like them. If it's a postman,
you'd know more than me, Dave, but isn't UK law that you have to, the person, it's on the onus is on the person who says they're being defamed to prove that everyone will recognize it as them. So if you have a postman, it
has to be untrue. It has to actually defame a person. So if you just say postman and you don't give them a name or a description, or you change the description so it doesn't look like your postman, then that deals with defamation, but that doesn't deal with the feeling of insult.
Certainly.
So I
think you can put yourself into the same situation. Like, all of us have some kind of embarrassing thing that we do. So if you were in the same situation where your embarrassing thing, like, so if you're, I don't think there's going to be an issue if you put in that your postman saved a cat from a fire, because that's, people would be pretty happy to be known as the postman that saved the cat from the fire. But if you said this is the postman who picks his nose all the time, that potentially, you're going to, I mean, I would just avoid it, I guess, unless it's something that's like, what I would wonder about, what is it that's so distinct about that postman that it needs to be in a book? I guess it would have to be, like, picking your nose is not something that's distinct enough that you would care, that you would go, oh well, that has to be that has to be documented. Like, maybe if there was some kind of OCD tick, like every time he put a letter in the box, he had to click his tongue or something like that, that maybe you go, well, that's distinct enough that you want to use it. But yeah, I'm not sure, really. Like, I would just change it. If he clicks his tongue every time he puts a letter in the box, you change it so that it's, he knocks 2 times before he puts a letter in the box, or he whatever, like, wiggles his eyebrows or something. But yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm trying to think. Like, I've tried to avoid using names of anyone I know pretty well. I mean, it's pretty impossible to avoid the names of anyone you could possibly have encountered in your life, but anyone that works in my work, well, Norway's difficult because Norway has very few first names, so there's just a small selection of like 20 names that every man has. In there are exceptions, of course, but the majority of people you meet are called Lars or Hans or Christian, or like, they're just all called the same thing. So in that case, there's twofold. There's the, you don't really have to worry, because if you call someone Hans in your book, how many have we got? 3, 4, maybe 5 Hans in an office, our office, which isn't very big. so even then you could just go, well, it's not you, obviously it's that other Hans. But yeah, if it was like a Irish person, there's more Irish and English names, so I just changed the name as well. I don't know, maybe I'm that they always say that you should be very you should observe the people around you and take note and save it for putting in books, but I don't think I'm very good at observing people and taking notes. I just make up people.
This is the thing. Sort of, if you don't take notes, if you're not the kind of author who takes notes on people around you and sticks them into books, then potentially it's not a problem you're going to get. It's more a sort of problem if you do notice these things.
But I think one tick from someone, or one like facet of someone's personality, is not an issue. I mean, there's I forget who's the famous quote where a bad artist steals from one person, a good artist steals from 100. Like, if you take 100 different personality traits from 100 people you know and blend them all together, then no one person is going to go, well, that's me. Because you go, well, no, I took your clicking your tongue from you, but I also took, this from Sam, and I took this from John, and I took this from, and you just go, well, it's just a combination of 100 people, and there's nothing, that particular character isn't anything specific to you. Whereas if you take every piece of a person's personality, well, then you're kind of, yeah, looking for trouble, I think. Especially if it's someone you know really well that you don't want to ruin the relationship with. Like, I think putting your wife into a book would be the worst idea possible, or husband, whatever, significant other. Yeah, don't do that, I guess. Or children, or parents, or anyone in your immediate family.
And the other aspect is stories, not character traits, but stories. So if you take something that someone's done and stick different characters in it, and obviously if you change the characters, you change the motivations, so it's going to unfold differently. But sort of, it does that potentially make it better or worse if you take something that someone's done and stick a different character on it? Are they going to think, oh, this sort of, I did that, and people know that I did that, and now there's this book out there about a character that does that, and they're a bit unpleasant.
I think, I don't like, so this is a good example, I think, is that my Matthew and Daniel, my sons, did a project when they were 11 or 12 or 13, something like that, where it was talk to your grandparents about their experiences during the Second World War. And I said, well, they were little children if they were even born during the Second World War. Like, we're so far from the Second World War that no one's alive anymore that was even a child. But they were talking, and they said that at least they had experiences of listening to their parents talking about their experiences during the Second World War. That at least they had heard a story. So it was, third hand. But and that was very interesting, because that was something that that I would never have thought to ask. So I think in a way that could be you can say to someone, listen, I'm doing research on this type of experience, and what do you think? I know you have this story about it, or you have this or that. Is it okay? Could I interview you? As if it's like a journalistic kind of thing. That you just say, I'm a writer, I do research, and I'd like to talk to you about this. And then if you're sitting there with a notepad saying, okay, so tell me about what happened then they can't claim that they didn't know you were going to put this in a book, and they have every opportunity to say, well, this is, could you change this aspect so it's not identifiable to me? Or yeah, I mean, someone was saying about, they named a specific army barracks during the Second World War, and they were talking about a lot of shenanigans that were going on, and they thought about it, and they said, well, that reflects badly on the base commander, because he was allowing shenanigans to go on. So they just changed the name of the army base to a fictional one. So I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be very difficult to get in trouble if you're aware of the issue. Because if it's about a specific person, you just be a bit more, try and throw in a bit more fuzziness to the whole thing. And if it's about a specific story, you just ask them and say, you've got a really interesting story about this. Can I use it?
Yeah. But I think we are both generally in agreement that you are going to change it to an extent. So we're not, while we can't put a point exactly on what to do, we are saying to not go with the just do what you want. If someone has a problem with it, it's their problem approach.
Yeah, I in no way would, like, as you said, I wouldn't mention, like, say, McDonald's. I wouldn't say the characters go to McDonald's, because anything, like, if they say, oh, I don't like this meal, and they throw it in the bin, then potentially McDonald's, say it becomes the biggest bestseller of all time, and then McDonald's goes, oh, well, then there's something worth suing for. We'll say that you're saying McDonald's isn't nice. You can call it, I don't know how far you need to go. So is it like Coming to America, where they could say McDonald's or McDonald's, whatever it was in Coming to America?
Well, again, I think it has to be, it gets complex with all the various jurisdictions. And the McDonald's Corporation would potentially sue you in the United States. So English law wouldn't necessarily be the same as the law you were sued under. So it would depend on which jurisdiction, but it would have to be identifiable as them. And it would have to not be a legitimate parody or some other defense. So if it was a comedy and you'd written about McDingbats and sort of the characters go there, and one of the things is there's a 1 in 3 chance that your burger is actually, the bun is made out of foam rubber, because they're a crazy, wacky place. I don't think McDonald's would be able to sue over that, because it's obviously a parody. It's comedy rather than actually saying that McDonald's have bad buns. But yeah, so I don't know. I wouldn't leave McDonald's out completely. I think it's okay for the characters to go to McDonald's, to eat at McDonald's. I agree with you that you don't say their meal was bad, because that does open you up to risk. But the reason I might is nothing to do with the risk of being sued if my book becomes a huge bestseller. It's potentially not with McDonald's, but with some brands, the chance that it will hugely date the book. And for instance, someone pulls out a Nokia. In the 90s, if someone had a Nokia phone, yeah, that's fine. Lots of people had Nokia phones. But in 20 years' time, are Nokias going to be hugely famous as mobile phones, or will they have disappeared? As even the biggest brands, a certain proportion of them fade every year.
Yeah, if your characters went to Woolworths, for instance, then you're suddenly in trouble. There's no more Woolworths.
Yeah, Woolworths were huge, and then they just went. And they went really quick. So yes. So if you've got a book where the characters go to Woolworths, it's not just that potentially some people will read it and think, this book was written 20 years ago. It's like that it doesn't convey anything to the reader.
Do you know what was interesting?
So putting that brand isn't giving all the readers things. Because if they don't know who Woolworths is, because Woolworths faded away, then it might as well be a made-up shop. So I think for certain things, sticking certain things into a book, it's not a case of whether you're worried about offending someone. It's a case of whether you're actually gaining something by having it there. Is that still going to be a useful thing to have referenced in 10, 20 years' time? Or could you just say they grabbed some pick and mix? So I'm assuming pick and mix is going to endure. Children seem to love pick and mix.
It'll endure past the apocalypse. The world will have ended, and they'll still be picking pigs. One thing I was going to say was, though, it does date things, but it's certain cases that can be a good thing where it becomes of its time. So I watched The Americans, the TV show, where it's set in the 80s, and they're listening to Yaz, and they're, you know, all this kind of thing, and that kind of, for people who grew up in the 80s at least, is a kind of a touchstone to go, oh, I remember that, and I remember that. So then if you had Woolworths, they go, oh yeah, I remember Woolworths.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a limit to it, because eventually all the people who remember Woolworths will no longer be around. But even then, I mean, like, so if you read H.G. Wells or something, he might talk about the haberdashery or the dry goods store or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's not something we refer to anymore. So, but you're aware it's of its time when you're reading it, I guess. You kind of, so I was reading Tintin to my son, and they're going to the moon, and they're going to use a nuclear engine to get to the moon. And obviously then I went, oh, when was this written? 1959. Oh, okay. And they're going in a massive iron spaceship that has no detachable parts of any kind. But, you know, as long as you're not too, like, if you're very hung up on details, you might be going, oh, this is just ridiculous. Tintin's completely ludicrous.
Well, again, I think that's a case of things being different enough that it's obvious that it's a thing. So not parody necessarily, but obviously not hard reality. Because if you take steampunk, there is some steampunk that is hard steampunk, as it were, where they're using a different kind of technology from electronics, where there's sort of the steam-based technology has become the driving force of innovation in a way that it didn't in the real world, but it holds together. And certainly to someone who isn't necessarily a specialist in fluid dynamics, it feels like a real science. And at the other end, you've got the stuff with giant walking robots and vampires and werewolves and all this kind of stuff. And with some steampunk, it's obvious that it's H.G. Wells type style stories that have been dialed up a bit. So we've got what's effectively magic, only it uses steam boilers. So steam-powered automata, which are effectively an AI with a coal-fired boiler. And it's not realistic, but it's different enough from reality that you don't go, but a coal-fired steam engine, like you'd have to pull a train, isn't a suitable power source for an artificial intelligence. You just accept it because it's obviously the world works differently. And I think Tintin's, we've got a nuclear reactor that we've put an iron cage around and now we're going to fly to the moon, is the same.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like James Bond was based on original person, but James Bond, I don't think Ian Fleming was ever sued by the original person, because he blended in enough other people to avoid it.
But yes, it also sort of depends on which James Bond, because the first James Bond novel is slightly pulpy, but it's gritty realism. Whereas you take sort of the things that people think of usually when they think of James Bond. You've got the crazy gadgets and womanizing with a martini to distract the villain from the fact you're using a watch to bend a light beam so you can read his cards in a game of poker. That's obviously not real spying.
I don't know how much the books had that, though.
The books,
I mean, I'm not.
didn't. The sort of the films are a lot more zazzed up.
Mm.
The books, I can't remember. It's been so long since I've read them, I can't remember how much of the books. I have a vague feeling Live and Let Die. Is it Live and Let Die that's got voodoo in?
I think so, yeah, if I'm remembering correctly. Roger Moore.
Yeah. The film where they've got Baron Samedi and one of the characters gets shot in the head and then comes back because of voodoo. And I read the book that it was based on, and that's got a lot less of the craziness in it. I can't remember if the voodoo was local color or if it actually had a plot effect. A vague feeling that some of there's a little bit of not quite real about some of the novels.
The novels are definitely not reality. So James Bond survives things that a human being could not possibly survive. Even at one point in one of the books, M, I think it's M, it could be one of the other characters. But anyway, they say to him, well, you have a habit of coming back. You have some kind of force of will, which means that you'll keep going even though you're completely destroyed physically and emotionally. So that's why we keep sending you on these missions. Like, you know, he goes to places where he would have frozen to death, or he would have, you know, whatever, died a million times, would have let go of the cliff, or whatever it happened to be. So they're not realistic in that way. But as far as I can remember, and I haven't read all of them, but I read 8 or 10 or something, he doesn't have lasers and that kind of stuff like the movies would. Even The Spy Who Loved Me is about him. It's told from the perspective of a woman who owns a motel, and some gangsters try and stick her up or whatever, and he just turns up as a motel guest, essentially. And it's just him, you know, fighting the gangsters with a gun. They had to change it completely for the movie because it would be just them stuck in a, you know, a small hotel, a motel, fighting a couple of gangsters. It wouldn't have been what people would have thought of as a James Bond movie. But anyway, we kind of went off topic a bit. We're kind of come up to our usual stopping time. Was there anything you wanted to mention at the end, Dave?
I don't think so, no. I think I've covered off all the things I wanted to announce to the world.
Cool. We will see you next week, and thank you for watching.
Thanks.